Welcome back to Real Estate Appraisal Principles and Procedures. This is your instructor, Matt Boxberger. And for this week's session, we're going to move now more specifically into the appraisal process. The last several weeks, we've covered real estate, the real estate transactions and real estate market more generally. Now we'll move into more specifically what we do in the appraisal process and how we use the information we've learned to this point as we analyze the property and the market for our appraisal. Now this week I'll start the session with a lecture about the first portion of Chapter 6 and then do a little bit of a demonstration on using the tool to create the first part of the appraisal report, which is our assignment in lieu of the discussion forum topic for this week. So let's go ahead and look at the overview of the appraisal process. There are several steps, and here we'll start with the first two, and you might argue that these are the most important, or certainly that they need to be in place before you can move into the rest of the appraisal process. So step one is identify the problem to be solved, and unless you've done appraisals before, you don't typically think of problem as the nature of an appraisal, but essentially it is. There's a question that needs to be answered that will require some research. The problem is you don't have the answer yet, and so you'll need to take some organized steps to solve that problem. So that may help just kind of frame your thinking in terms of the investigation and analysis that needs to be done to get to the end point, which is the appraised value. We look at it as a problem. Now the next step, the scope of work, is a key one, and that has a number of subtopics underneath it that we'll walk through here. So broadly, the scope of work is a determination of the type and the extent of the analysis that you have to perform to do the appraisal. So as you answer the questions there or identify the information that's listed under the scope of work, that will answer this question of what is the scope of work that I need to do to complete this appraisal. And that certainly helps determine the amount of time you'll need, the appropriate fee to charge for the appraisal, and so on. So the first point is identification and location of the property. And that means very specifically you start with the address, but that you make sure you have the full legal description, because sometimes addresses are not precise. There can be duplexes or several addresses involved. It could be a property that's actually two or more legal parcels with one building on it. So again, you go beyond just the address, although you start from there, but you look at, as we'll see in our work this week, the plat map so that you can see the layout of the property, make sure that that corresponds with what the client is describing for you. So identifying specifically what is to be appraised is the first step there. And then identification of the property rights to be appraised. You remember this as the fee simple ownership typically, and as I had said in earlier lectures, for residential appraisals, it's almost always the fee simple value of the property that's being appraised. In commercial properties where the rights are split between a landlord and tenant, there may be occasions when you're appraising the landlord side, the least fee interest. And so again, particularly in commercial properties, it's important to determine if it is the fee simple value, even though the owner may not have fee simple ownership rights at the time because it's leased out, or if it is in fact the least fee value that the owner does hold at the time of the appraisal. And then the next point is the effective date of the appraisal. And again, for residential lending, this is typically the current date, but for a good portion of appraisers' work, it can be a retrospective date if you're looking back at the date that someone died or the date of a divorce. There are some occasions where you look at a prospective value if a person is moving and the company intends to sell the home within 90 days, then part of the appraisal assignment may be to estimate the prospective value of the property at some point in the future. The next topic there then, definition of value to be estimated. Again, with typical residential appraisals, this is the current market value, but as we saw last week, there's a number of different values that may be appraised, and so making sure that you and the client agree and understand that definition of value is important at this point in the appraisal process. So as you answer those first 4 questions or pieces of information needed for the scope of work, the purpose and intended use of the appraisal is going to become clear, but it's important that you agree and understand with the client exactly what the purpose and the intended use of the appraisal is. That can lead to some other details like the amount of research that needs to be done, the amount of documentation, the type of report that will be delivered for the intended use. For example, an attorney taking a matter into court is probably going to want a lot more research and detail in the report than a lender may need for a typical tract home that they have a low loan to value on, where a more limited scope of work and more limited amount of research and reporting may be required. And then the final topic, any special limiting conditions. That is included to protect the appraiser oftentimes, and also to inform more fully the client or the other users of the appraisal what has been done, what hasn't been done. In the book on page 150, you can see, and it continues for the next 2 pages, the standard kind of assumptions and limiting conditions that are put in most residential reports that were specified or mandated by Freddie and Fannie, the government-sponsored entities. And you can see there's at least 6 of those assumptions and limiting conditions, and then that ties a bit into the certifications that are on the next page, where there's 25 of those in terms of certifying that you did do things or stating that you did not do things as part of the appraisal process. So again, that is a piece of the scope of work. It's fairly standardized in residential lending, but especially in commercial or private appraisals, there may be some special requirements or limits on what you can do that need to be clearly stated in the report, so that if there's any question down the road, that you can look back to what you agreed to do or not to do as part of the appraisal process. Now, continuing on in the steps that are outlined in the book of the appraisal process, and these we'll cover in more detail in the coming weeks, but to go ahead and lay it out for you here. Step 3 then, after the scope of work is established, to gather, record, and verify the necessary data to solve the appraisal problem. Certainly here the verifying is important, that there's information that can be limited, out of date, or potentially incomplete. And so as you're doing the appraisal process, it's important both to look at online information as well as talk to parties to the transaction, the buyer, the seller, their agents. With residential appraising and access to the MLS system, you can get a lot of this from the seller's standpoint in terms of how the property was listed and described. But frequently talking to the buyer, you can get some more insight into what was important to them, what they saw that may not have been described in the listing, or that the listing agent may be hesitant to describe or to discuss. So it helps paint a fuller picture in terms of all the factors that were involved in the purchasing decision, and comparing those between the comparable sales and between your subject. And so analyzing then follows after the gathering and the verification of the data. Now, step 5, form an opinion of land value. In residential appraising in a primarily fully developed area like the Silicon Valley, it's difficult to find sales of raw or improved tracts without the buildings on them. And so this becomes more difficult, where you may need to abstract or allocate the portions of the sale price that belong to the land versus the building or improvements, and certainly becomes less reliable when you don't have a large supply of unimproved property to use. But it's a basic foundations that points you to the locational differences. So if a particular parcel has a better view, or a better location on a better street that you're looking at, that it may be the same style of home built on both of the parcels, but looking at the locational aspects that are contained in the land are an important part of this step. And in commercial appraisals, or appraisals where the highest and best use may not necessarily be the current use, it is very important to look at the land value as a starting point as you identify the alternative kind of uses. If there's an office building there, but it looks like a retail site may be better, then you'll need to look at what land that's zoned for retail use has been selling for, and use that as a baseline as you're proceeding on to the next steps of the appraisal then. So with that, then, we'll move to step 6, which is to form our opinion of value by each of the 3 approaches. Now, the 3 approaches, if those haven't been mentioned yet, are the sales comparison approach, the income approach, and the cost approach. And depending on the type of assignment, you may only use 1 or 2 of those approaches. With residential appraising, the sales comparison approach forms the core of the value opinion. Frequently, the cost approach is used, again, depending on the market and the requirements of the lender. The income approach isn't typically used for owner-occupied properties like residential properties, or some smaller commercial properties where there's not a strong market of rental data available. And so again, depending on the type of property, the income approach may be the one or only approach used for some types of retail property, and the cost approach may be used as the only approach applicable for some special purpose properties like a church, for example. So again, this is part of the appraisal and determining which of the approaches to be used, and then in step 7, the reconciliation of how much weight to give each of the approaches, or within the approach, how much weight to give each of the indicators of value. You may look at 5 comparable sales and conclude that 2 of them are very similar to your subject and need to be given the most weight. The other ones may help bracket the market, a home that was significantly better, or a home that was significantly worse than the subject, or significantly further away, some things that make it less reliable or requiring more assumptions and adjustments wouldn't be given as much weight. So in that reconciliation step, that's where you weigh each of these factors and use them to come to your final opinion of value. And then step 8, creating the report that is needed or requested by your client to give you that final opinion of value. So that will conclude our lecture for this week. Next week we'll continue in chapter 6 with some detail of each of those three valuation approaches. We won't do chapter 7 in the book, which covers a lot of building material, building types, as I don't think that's as important as moving on into chapter 8, which then goes into further detail on collecting and analyzing the data. So now we'll switch over here and I'll just do a quick run through so you can see it on your screen as well of how the Total 2011 tool will look as you work through these steps. And I'm assuming at this point everyone has it installed and has done some initial work with the tool. So with that, we'll wrap up the lecture here and take a quick look at the tool and how it looks.
And now just to walk through NDC here, we'll search on a property, Santa Clara County, put in my address there. And search. Once you've got this, then the print profile button will actually pop up another screen and you can print this out so you can save a PDF or print a paper copy of the report. And then to get the plat map, you push this View Plat Map button. If this doesn't work, you can let me know. There's a little bit of setup, I think, that's required for Java to be running, but it should bring up the map on a screen that looks like this, and then you can just do a file save and save a copy. It will be a TIFF file, as I mentioned, and as I also described, it's kind of an unusual version of TIFF, I think. Windows tools won't view it easily, and so if you have any problem with that, you can just use the TIFF plat map that I converted to a JPEG file and put in the files section for this week's lecture and pull that in. But if you are inclined and want to save it, and if you have a image tool like Snagit that will save in a different format, you can use that as well. So if you'd like to get your own plat, but I don't want to spend too much time on the technical headaches from the NDC site, so I just wanted to show you how it would look and how you'd get there. So with that, we'll end this portion here. So once you launch Total 2011, your screen should look something like this, and then we'll start a new report here, and let's use the Jumpstart. I put a quick clone example report in the file section where I had used the one that a la mode provides, and you can certainly work with that as well if you'd like. So just to get a feel for what the entire report looks like. But you'll have identified your subject property. It can be your home or another one you know of, however you want to do it. And then you'll type in the address here. And I'll go ahead and do that for mine. Now you see it memorized because I saved that city and zip code before, so that just makes data entry quicker here. And so now you've got your report address, and the first time I think it prompted me to make the description the same as the address, and so I went ahead and did that. In the assignment, I give you the client and lender name. You can put those in here or add them as a contact if you'd like to play around with the software. The appraiser, you'll be in there once you've set this up, and so I just set it up as a test Boxberger. Supervisor, if you start out in appraising, as you probably know, you've got to have your first 2,000 hours under a licensed or certified appraiser, and that would be the supervisor who would co-sign with you. These other areas you can use if you'd like, just to get a feel for the tool, but that's not required. So then we'll go ahead and say open, and it will open up a order page here, and so we'll see how that looks. And that's got the order form. And then what I said was we'll do this on the 10004 form, the URAR, Uniform Residential Appraisal Report. And so you can get to that by hitting the Contents button here, and that'll bring up a list of the available forms. I think it defaults here to the 10004 appraisal report, and as I'm looking here, I don't see it. These are some supplementary forms, so we can just put 10004 here, and we'll search for that. Here we go at the top, URAR 10004. We don't need to use this one, this UAD, Uniform Appraisal Data Set. That's a new change that's just happened where you're encoding the data you put in there, and it's not as intuitive. It's not kind of plain English in some of the fields, and so we won't use that. So this one we'll put here, and then so that's added that form to our report. Later on we'll add a plat map, and so we can search for that as well and put that page in here. So now that's highlighted, and I'll put this one over here. So then those are the forms we'll start with here in the report. You'll see you can add a map page as well after you're in the report. So apply and save and close. So now we're on the page 1 of the URAR here. It brought in the address we had, and then you'll go ahead and go through and put in the information that I gave you as far as the borrower and the client. And on your printout that you get from NDC, you'll have information about the legal description, the owner of public record, county, I guess we know that. So this section, subject property, is what I'd like you to fill out this week. When you look at the NDC report, which I've got my PDF here, I'm just highlighting it. You'll see here that some of those fields you'll need the parcel number, the map page and grid that you can put in there, census tract, legal description, and the tax amount and tax year for the report.